Hello and welcome. We're glad to have you here today. Please have your cup of coffee, cup of tea, cup of water, sit down and get ready for an information-packed webinar. We're very happy you've decided to join us here today. Please feel free to let us know where you're joining us from by putting it in the chat. Once again, welcome to this webinar. Hello, my name is Althea. Thank you for joining us today for exploring humanizing pedagogies for multilingual learners and their teachers. This webinar explores how and why humanizing pedagogies for multilingual learners and their teachers matter. This event is provided as a public service. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed belong solely to the guest speakers and do not necessarily represent the views of our organization. Our panel comprises of esteemed experts. Please, feel free to place your questions in the Q&A box, and we will answer as many as possible at the end of the webinar. Please feel free to engage with each other in the chat box and start by putting where you're from in the chat box right now. And with that, I am going to hand this over to Dr. Zip Nguyen, President and CEO of Center for Applied Linguistics.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon or late afternoon. We are so very glad to welcome you to this webinar that's co-sponsored by CAL and the Bueno Center. The subject of humanizing pedagogy has been, I think, a very timely subject to explore in these very turbulent time for us in multilingual education. And I am so very glad to welcome our co-sponsor, Dr. Tanya Hogan, from the Bueno Center, who also have agreed to sponsor this webinar for Dr. Cummins and Dr. Vieska. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Tanya Hogan from the Bueno Center, our co-sponsor for this webinar.
Hey, thank you so much, Dr. Zip. Buenos dias, everyone. On behalf of the Bueno Center, I want to thank the Center for Applied Linguistics, Dr. Zip and Althea, who's behind the scenes, for collaborating on this important conversation on humanizing pedagogies. As the host, I get to share a little bit about the Bueno Center. This year, 2026, we're celebrating 50 years. Bueno was built for and with comunidad. Our commitment is to accompany students, families, and educators, especially in bilingual and multilingual communities, so they can thrive with dignity, belonging, and real opportunity. We start from a simple truth. Our communities are knowledge holders. Students bring language, historia, and brilliance. And then families bring expertise, values, and ways of knowing that schools too often ignore. So humanizing work means getting to use your full linguistic repertoire and be authentically you. The Bueno Center partners with schools, districts, and community organizations through professional learning, coaching, program evaluation, and research grounded in relationships and accountability. If you are interested in partnering for professional learning, evaluation, or research, or if you want to support this work through funding or donations so it stays accessible to the communities who need it most, please reach out to me directly. I'll put my email in the chat in just a minute. One way that this shows up is through learning spaces when we convene with educators across communities. This summer, Bueno is hosting our teacher institute called Chords of Esperanza, Queering by Literacy and Centering Justicia. And we're going to be exploring the intersection of bilingual and multilingual education, immigrant justice, and queer pedagogy. If you can't make it to Colorado, there will be a virtual option as well, so I hope you will all check it out. Now, we're meeting today in a moment of escalating attacks on many of our communities and on truthful teaching about history and power. That's why, and I have my book right here, Humanizing Pedagogies, is so important right now. It helps us keep dignidad, relationships, and real learning at the center when systems push control and compliance. And because this work lives in practice, not just in theory, We are so grateful to learn from two educators who have spent their careers building humanizing spaces with and for multilingual communities. I was also fortunate to work alongside both of these incredible women during my time at CU Denver, and it is my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Nancy Cummins and Dr. Kara Viesca. So Nancy has experienced tremendous joy working as an educator of multilingual learners and their teachers. Aided by the languages and dialects that make up her linguistic repertoire, her work with students, teachers, and families from diverse linguistic and cultural backgrounds has taken many shapes. Classroom teacher, university professor, program director, school district administrator, and independent consultant supporting schools and districts to strengthen instruction for multilingual learners. She retired from the University of Colorado Denver in 2017 and is currently a clinical professor emeritus. Humanizing Pedagogies is the culminating publication of her academic career. And officially retired, Nancy remains active in promoting humanizing, teaching, and community building while also spending time gardening, walking, reading, and listening to live music, surrounded by a loving family and amazing friends. She's always guided by these intentions: be kind, listen more, fight oppression. I love that because it's immediately actionable. It's a daily checklist for how we want to be with students, families, and each other. Dr. Kara Viesca is professor in teaching, learning, and teacher education at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and her work stays grounded in real classrooms and real teacher learning. Kara taught English language development, German, and English language arts in middle schools in California and Virginia. She's also taught English in Mexico in a home for abandoned children and in China at Peking University's graduate school. For 20 years, she's worked alongside pre-service and in-service teachers to strengthen teaching and learning in content area classrooms, especially for multilingual learners. Kara also brings joy and creativity into how she moves through the world. Dancing, especially tap, music, singing, violin, and piano, crafting and sewing, language learning, and a proudly super nerdy love of nonfiction and audiobooks while walking. That wholeness matters because humanizing pedagogy requires educators to be full people too. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Dr. Zip. Thank you again to you and the Center for Applied Linguistics for holding space and guiding us through this important conversation.
Thank you. Wow, wonderful. What a wonderful introduction. I am without words, so I'm just gonna turn it over to Kara and Nancy for sharing their ideas with you.
Awesome. Honestly, like Tanya, we could drop the mic. You said it all. Like when people ask us what humanizing pedagogies are, I think you've done just a really nice job of introducing the idea and centering who we are as human beings and how we connect with one another, especially through our teaching and learning practices. So thank you for modeling that through the work of Bueno. Thank you also, Cal, for having us here today and for your incredible work and leadership in the field. We're super honored to be able to share our work with you all. So we've already been introduced, and the name of our book is Humanizing Pedagogies for Multilingual Learners. But today we're also wanting to talk about humanizing teachers too. And before we get too far into our presentation, we always like to pause to acknowledge the land that we're on. Nancy lives near the University of Colorado, Boulder. That's also where the Bueno Center is, and I'm near the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. So we use the land acknowledgements from those two institutions. But most importantly, we want to recognize and honor the impact of Native knowledge on our work and on our notions of humanizing pedagogies and how we think about being in right relationship with one another, with the land, and how important it is to honor the Native American relatives and neighbors that we have who are the past, present, and future stewards of the lands that we're on. One of the really important things that we think is going beyond land acknowledgement and not just acknowledging that, but also really working to have right relationship and to integrate important information about Native students and practices and epistemologies into our work. And so we wanted to share a great resource. Maybe you're already familiar with it, but Native Knowledge 360 is run by the Smithsonian Institute and has a wealth of resources to share with students, to grow our own knowledge and understandings and build our own relationships. So there's always something we can do. With that, turn over to Nancy for a sec.
So it is, as Kara said, a great honor to be able to do this presentation for all of you. The one thing that gives me great hope, maybe the greatest hope in this time, is that teachers are still in classrooms every single day, making the effort to connect with their students, to teach well, despite the chaos that's surrounding us and the learners that we all care so much about. Kara and I have been friends and colleagues since 2009, I think, when I came back from Finland and rejoined the CU Denver faculty. And our friendship and our collaboration is intertwined between the time that we overlapped at CU Denver, but also my time as a Fulbright scholar in Finland, and then a visiting professor there, because as part of that work, we were working and forming a coalition of teacher educators across countries who had the common concern of how do we prepare teachers of multilingual learners, what's common to all of us, and then what's unique in different educational settings. I could go on for a really, really long time about our friendship. It keeps me going, even though I've told Kara I won't write anymore. But this book started out as a conversation at a conference, I think a NABE conference 10 years ago. And to see it in fruition and to have the opportunity to share our thinking with all of you is, as I said, a great honor. So, but a little bit about why this book and our approach. We know and we have used and we have supported many books that are out there with great strategies for teaching multilingual students. Most of them are directed at language educators, and we love language educators. We are language educators, but we also want to reach content teachers who are working with diverse cultural and linguistic student populations. The reality is that multilingual learners spend most of their educational lives in content classrooms in all English instruction. And so it's really important to take this view of humanizing pedagogy beyond our center of our field and out wider. We see the book as a resource for whole school professional development and for individuals who just want to learn and grow. We hope that it can play a role if you're in pre-service teacher education and in advanced studies in educational policy and practice. This webinar will give you all just a taste of what we are talking about, and we do hope that you will want more. So that was us, a little bit about us. Now this is all of us. It's really important to forefront joy. And so we want you to think for a minute, what's something that's just right in this moment making you happy today? And write it in the chat really quickly. And as much as I would like to respond to the individuals who I know are in the webinar and have written in the chat, there's no way for me to talk, look at the chat, and write at the same time. But if you know me personally, I love you. If you don't know me personally, I want to love you.
We think that one of the best ways to humanize ourselves is to sometimes pause and just remember the simple joys of life. And so I'm looking at dogs making us happy, food making us happy, sunny weather. There's so many ways that we can find joy every day. And that's a really big part, of course, of humanizing ourselves and the people we work with. So a little bit more background on this work. We started when collaborating when we had a huge grant at CU Denver. It was called eCalms, E-Learning Communities for Academic Language Learning in Mathematics and Science. And we were working with a large group of people thinking about how could we prepare professional learning resources to support content teachers in working with multilingual learners that cross like geography, time. There's all these complicated factors in supporting professional learning that's really meaningful for teachers. And it was a wonderful experience because we really centered great learning and teachers and their lives, their real lives, in our efforts to design these what we called e-workshops. And now I use this language of, it was humanizing professional learning. We didn't use that language at the time, but we were really interested in honoring the expertise and agency and ability that teachers have and bring to any situation, and tried to create resources that would be meaningful in any situation. So that meant there was a lot of choice and flexibility. We tried to design resources that could help people answer broader questions versus just focusing on very singular kinds of monolithic outcomes. And our first grant in designing that, we came up with this three-part learning cycle: explore, make it work, and share. And so in explore, we provided some materials that would answer the question that was guiding the e-workshop, or that unit in the e-workshop. And then in make it work, we would provide opportunities to make the ideas from the explore work in our practice. So you could do something with it tomorrow or next week. It could be lesson planning and practice with students. It could be talking with families and collecting data. There's all sorts of ways to put the important ideas through the exploration into practice. One of the important things is we always included an option for you make it work. So we honored the reality that we can have all the most brilliant ideas in our offices at the university, but they may not match what's happening in your classroom and what matters for you and your students. And so there was always that option: take our ideas and tweak them, design your own, so you make it work. And so then the final piece was share. And groups would either do this online through a threaded discussion or meet in person and share and talk about what they had learned and experienced. And then they'd go back into the cycle with the next unit: explore, make it work, and share. In our second grant, we were able to scale up how many workshops we had and how many teachers we worked with. And we also have a little bit of data about that here. We worked with almost 3,000 teachers during the time of that 5-year grant, and 2,400 of them responded to our end of e-workshop survey. And 92% reported the e-workshops as being effective at increasing their knowledge about working with multilingual learners, and 91% reported the e-workshops improve their ability to work with multilingual learners. So we felt like that was a big success. There were multiple different workshops, but what we felt was the real success wasn't in exactly the content, it was honestly the approach. The taking a really engaged approach to supporting teachers in making meaning that matters for their location, for their students, for what they're working on, and doing it in a way that can impact practice. And so Nancy and I wanted to continue with that practice of explore, make it work, and share, which is what we did in this book. Each chapter has an explore section, a make it work section, and a share section. And then the other thing that we wanted to do was build off some research that we had done as part of that second grant, which was a literature review, where we examined the research on preparing teachers to work with multilingual students in content classrooms. And we established that it's important for teachers to have knowledge and skills around context, orientations, and pedagogy. So those three ideas became big organizing features as we started to establish what we think is important in terms of developing humanizing pedagogies and supporting teachers in that development.
So one of the essential features of humanizing pedagogy is moving from a traditional classroom to one that is more expansive and more interactive. I'm going to read from the introduction from the book, and I want you to just close your eyes and listen for a second or three. Picture a second grade classroom in the Midwestern US, led by an experienced teacher and composed mainly of multilingual students. It has a calm and caring feeling to it, as around the room, children are working in groups, some of them with an adult, others collaborating with their peers. Across the different groups, students and adults are using English and languages other than English. They are engaging with texts that relate to students' lives and cultural practices outside of school. There is total inclusion of learners with disabilities. Students take on leadership roles and engage each other as they successfully collaborate without the supervision of an adult. Not everyone is involved in the same activities or even the same language, yet all students are deeply engaged in meaningful learning across an hour-long span, illustrating strong thinking skills, creativity. One group is performing a puppet show for each other, and expansive language practices. A fantasy? No. A made-up vignette? No. This is what a group of experienced multilingual scholars from the US, Finland, and Germany recently observed as part of a joint research that they were conducting. Some declared it the best teaching they had ever witnessed, and all felt that it represented the essence of humanizing pedagogy. This classroom provides a powerful representation of what we mean by humanizing pedagogies. And it's important to know that this wasn't a school for the elite. There were students from multiple language backgrounds, differing abilities, and positionalities. But it was a school where the faculty worked together and with the cooperation of the community to shift from the traditional one-size-fits-all instructional approach to a warm, embracing multitasking space where students were able to experience many ways to receive and express knowledge and understanding.
Oh, direction.
So we're going to begin we'll talk about context and orientations and pedagogical practices. It's important to know that context relates both to inside and especially outside the classroom. Sometimes when we say we have to pay attention to the context, teachers interpret the word to mean paying attention just to the physical environment and say, well, I put multilingual posters up, so I've dealt with the context. But really, the context refers to everything that surrounds the learners and their communities. We often say to each other and to others, nothing about teaching is neutral. In every society, there are invisible and visible lines of power and privilege which can be hard to see, depending whether or not the status quo conforms with your expectations of how things are or ought to be. You can see on the screen, the context refers to policies that are in place, the history of the local community, as well as the larger community of the United States or whatever context you're looking in. It's economics, public sentiments, cultural narratives, expectations and how they vary or are the same across different students with different backgrounds. It's the resources that are made available or kept from communities to be able to teach well. It's the vibes you have, the experiences, the relationship. So context is a very important thing to notice. We may not be able to change it. We may be working in settings that have very specific expectations that don't conform necessarily to our expectations for humanizing. And I want to draw attention to the graphic that's in the middle. This is a representation of the notion of the Three Sisters indigenous planting. And you can see that there's corn and there's squash and there's beans, but they're not just haphazardly seeds thrown into the ground. The corn grows first. And when it is taller, then the beans can grow up the vines. And then the squash are planted and they provide both fruit, but shade for the soil that conserves water, that allows the corn to continue to grow, and the beans and the squash itself. And it's this interrelationship and intentionality about what we're doing that is at this essence of context and seeing how everything is interrelated.
So in our book, we have 3 sections, context, orientations, and pedagogy. And so for the context section, there are 3 chapters. And I just thought we would share a little bit of information from one chapter to get a sense of kind of try to show what we mean by these things that we're talking about. And in the chapter on dominant cultural narratives, we talk about a narrative that is very prevalent in school and society, which is that difference is deficit, that difference is a problem. And we explore the way that plays out in schools and also its relationship to assimilationism. And there's a couple of stories that we talk about in here in the chapter that we thought would help illustrate this. So first of all, that image, that equality versus equity, is probably something most of us have already seen before. But one of the things that we're trying to break down is who is deciding what success looks like. That's often where assimilation comes in, is where we've decided this is what you're supposed to be like, you need to change to be like us. And so assimilation can even be playing a role in this picture. Somehow we decided when we looked at this picture that what the people on the other side of the fence want is to watch the game. But have we asked them? Do we know what they want? Is it possible that one of them actually would prefer to sit down in the stands and watch the game, or one of them would actually prefer to play in the game? Maybe it's even possible that one of them would like to sit on the yard and throw around a baseball. It's often the case that we decide what multilingual students and other students need based on our notion of success or on our notion of, what it's supposed to look like, which can be a way of positioning their cultural and linguistic practices as a problem or as a difference that's a deficit. And so it's so important for us as we seek to humanize ourselves and the students we work with, that we recognize that there's ways that we're not always positioning other, like different kinds of knowledges as important, different notions of success as meaningful, as reasonable. And we always have to be looking at whose ideas are mattering here, whose ideas are centered, and then especially how can we preserve human dignity. Classrooms are often a really important opportunity for students to learn how to grapple with the inherent tensions that exist when humans come into contact. Like, as much as we might love and care about one another, we can still have friction and we can still have challenges that need to be sorted out. And so we can also model in really humanizing ways what that can look like. And if we disrupt the differences deficit narrative and the notion that assimilation is the answer, we can come up with different solutions. An example of this is from a story we tell in the book with a thumbs up. That's actually a gesture that is very offensive in some parts of the world. And there was an instance where a student came to a school who came from a family in a part of the world that found that gesture to be incredibly offensive. And so the student was just appalled seeing it used all over in the classroom. There was a lot of like thumbs up in the classroom. Once the teacher realized what was going on, she had an option there. She could choose to just say, well, this child lives in America now, she needs to get used to it and just needs to assimilate. Or she could attend to the human dignity of that child and recognize the challenging situation the child is in, and instead choose to co-construct a solution with the whole class. This was a teachable moment. This was a learning opportunity. The entire class was able to learn that gestures can have different meanings in different parts of the world, and that they were welcoming a new friend into their classroom for whom a gesture that they were using in their classroom was difficult for them to see because they knew it as offensive. And so how about as a class, we find a different way to communicate without using thumbs up? And they decided together that instead of thumbs up, they would do raise the roof. And so the students loved being able to co-construct the solution. It was this wonderful learning opportunity for all the students involved. And it centered the student who was new into the context as an important member of the community whose perspectives, life experiences, cultural practices also mattered. And that's what I think a lot of the Humanizing Pedagogies work truly is not asking people to change, but asking the way we work together to change and to center the human dignity of all of us, including us as teachers, in figuring out the solutions as we work together. And when we do that work, having kind of the more meta conversations around sorting through those tensions, we can have incredible teachable moments with students where they recognize really big opportunities to disrupt the differences deficit narrative and see that human difference is and it's something that we can embrace and grow from, or it's something that we can pretend isn't and like lose that interconnectedness with the people in our community. We also have Make It Works in our book. So this is an example. We have 3 Make It Works in each chapter. One is at the intrapersonal level because of the work we often need to do to humanize ourselves or to understand ourselves as we try to be in humanizing relationships with others. Interpersonal is then in those interpersonal interactions from person to person. And the systemic is thinking more about wider policies and practices, maybe more at the school level. And so for each chapter, we have a Make It Work where you can explore and, try to put some of these ideas into practice. And something else I forgot to point out was each chapter has critical thinking and complexity thinking and critical reflection questions that guide the thinking and the work from Explore, Make It Work, and Share. And so we recommend people take a minute to reflect on these before they begin the work of the chapter, and then reflect again and kind of revisit these questions as they continue to work on the ideas, maybe after the Make It Work or Share, or even before.
So the next aspect of the book, and really the work we all need to do, is our orientations. Orientations are grounded on our beliefs and values, both stated and unstated. They're where we direct our attention. They're the assumptions that we make about our learners, their families, their capacities to learn and grow. The list on the screen reflects many of the dominant narratives that are floating around out in the environment and perpetuated in the larger society. And they are, at their essence, very dehumanizing. Control, domination, one size fits all. Policy over people is one that really stands out to me in the current. You see differences, deficit. So if we then try to shift our orientations, and I'm going a little fast now because we want to leave some time for questions. We want you to imagine instead, Kara, can you move on?
Sorry.
The kinds of orientations that are essential to humanizing our classrooms, our students, and our colleagues. Because as the adults in the environment and in a school or in a district, we often, if we have these, what we think of as not closed-minded, but closed and narrowing orientations, we dehumanize the people that we most need to work together with and depend upon to change what's happening in a school. So these are openness, interconnectedness, agency, curiosity, and creativity. And these came out of work that Kara and the group of people research, and if you want to speak more, you can. The idea of agency then became personal agency and shared agency. Because for me, one of the orientations that's essential to this work is shared responsibility. As an educators in a building, we are all responsible for the outcomes for all the students, no matter which slice of their day or which grade level we're in. We're all in this together. There are other orientations, but these are very essential. In looking, and Carol will give a little example here coming up.
Yeah, so we have 4 chapters in our orientation section. In each chapter, we tried to give examples of those orientations in practice. And so we took 2 for each of them to kind of go into. So I highlighted those here on the slide. But here's just an example of an orientation towards interconnectedness. There was a school that was concerned about students being treated poorly by other students, like multilingual students were being made fun of at lunch and in different spaces like that. And so they wanted to do something to address that. And they ended up planning a multicultural night where the whole school was invited, but it was mostly just the multilingual students and their families that came. It was a lot of fun. It celebrated diversity. Everyone who was there had an amazing time. And it didn't change the issues it sought to address, because this wasn't about an interconnected approach that really included everyone and brought everyone to the table. It was a volunteer kind of select-in approach. The contrast is a school that I worked with here in Nebraska that planned a global gala. They did it 2 years in a row, and they took a whole entire school day, and the students who were multilingual students in the building spent months preparing for it. They made videos about their home countries, their cultures, their language, their practices. The parents came and supported the development of stations, and the whole entire school rotated through different stations. The PE teacher planned a game from another country. The music teacher planned to teach a song in another language. The whole entire day was just about elevating the life and experiences and capabilities of the multilingual students in the building. And this was building that had a new influx of multilingual students. And a lot of the teachers were feeling rather unprepared to work with students. And they noticed from doing this global gala and seeing the students lead stations and teach the entire school about themselves and their families and their culture and their community, how capable those students were. And it changed so much about the school. The students' social status was elevated across the school. New relationships were developed across different groups of kids. Teachers saw students differently. It really had this interconnected approach that built relationships and drew people together. And so that's we're not saying multicultural nights aren't fabulous and have their role, but if we're striving to build relationships outside of the multilingual community, we often need to do something more like the Global Gala that really brought the whole community together and elevated and centered those students' knowledge and abilities. Here's an example of our Make It Works in that chapter. One of the major things that is super important is obviously to co-construct shared agreements. If we want to humanize ourselves and the students that we work with, we need to have an ability to co-construct what it means to work together. We need to have ongoing conversations about what it means to work together, and we need to constantly be checking in on if we're meeting our expectations and where we need to adjust and make improvements.
So the third area then that we address in the book specifically is pedagogies. And on the screen, you can see and probably relate to and probably are working under practices that are frequently used in schools. They represent the status quo in far too many schools and classrooms, and they are a reflection of orientations that too often put procedure over people. And so I want to make the point, however, that at different moments in our careers in teaching, Kara and I have taught using each one of these practices. We are not trying to say we're perfect and other people have to be like us. We're saying that it took considered time and energy to look inward, to have a sense of what really brought out the joy in kids and their learning thrived, to shift our own teaching practice. And we're not here to accuse anybody or chastise anyone, because it's an ever-evolving process to notice what we're doing, to examine what might motivate us, and take small and then bigger, if possible, and bigger steps to shift our practices. Whatever you're doing now, the fact that you're attending this webinar means that your inclinations are to do more to create authentic and humanizing relationship with your students and their families, which brings us to how we reimagine pedagogy to be more humanizing. This slide, which I have a hard time reading because it's so little on my screen, it summarizes some, but not all the ways that we can humanize our instruction. But we work together with our students to create real products and address real problems. We have language-rich activities that are aimed at higher order thinking skills and multilingual repertoires. Well, I'm going to come to that later. Activities relate to kids' lives and experiences and then connect to things they don't already know. Teachers challenge students to apply. We don't want rote work. We know that some of you are expected to follow a script. So if you have to follow a script, what are ways you can still build relationships with the students who are in front of you? And I did glance at a question, is this just for a certain grade level? These positions that we're putting out there, they're from preschool through college. They informed our college teaching. They informed even though they weren't written this way at the time, all of the consulting that I ever did were around how to shift practices to make sure that we acted on the belief that all students are capable learners and all of their language resources count. You can go to the next one. Oh, I know.
Wait, I went the wrong way. Sorry.
It's okay. And the slide also summarizes just some of the ways, but it's not intended to make you feel inadequate, but rather to provide hope that there are many ways that we can open our hearts and classrooms to our students. So in the pedagogy section, there are 4 4 chapters or modules. And one of the things that's important is you don't see how to do grammar and you don't see direct literacy instruction as the chapter titles because there's other people that do those things and they do them very well. What we wanted to address in the pedagogy section were underpinning skills, strategies, and approaches that help to humanize any instructional site. So meaningful collaboration. How do we get students to work together with each other? How do we get us to work together with the students and their families? Grouping and regrouping. And those of you who have worked with me know that it's very essential to think there is no one right way to group students. And when students are from diverse linguistic and cultural and economic, religious, gender identities, mixing students in different ways allows for bringing out the essence in different settings of different students. Authentic language practices, and we think of language practices as working at the oral level with listening, speaking, language practices working at the text level with reading and writing, and then of course we have specific suggestions. We have make it works, and we have ideas. The one that most resonates with my heart is the final chapter in the book, which is about deepening conceptual understandings. And the reason this is so is that what happens too often to multilingual learners is the attitude, well, they don't know it because they don't know it in English. And I can't teach them if they can't already read and write in English. And what we want to do is to open our hearts and open our practices, that our job is to deepen students' conceptual reservoirs, what they know, their thinking, their conceptual knowledge, their self efficacy in being able to navigate. And the book goes into all the areas of the conceptual reservoir, but it's that we can add to students' knowledge through any language that they speak. We can get things in the reservoir through listening, through observing, through reading, asking questions, interaction, and the leaving the reservoir representing what we know also can be done through physical movement, artistic expression, so many ways other than a written test or listening to a lecture and answering questions longhand afterwards. And so what underlies our view of teaching multilingual learners is they have so many avenues to learn, and that we want to be able to leverage, even if we're in a mandated all English instruction situation, their linguistic repertoire, their home languages, the languages they use in the community can all be resources for deepening that conceptual understanding.
I keep going the wrong direction. Sorry about that.
That's
So,
okay.
that's our planned presentation for today. We want to thank you so much. We're going to open it up and have a conversation with questions. But before we do that, I just wanted to share another resource. There's a journal that I helped co-found called Racial Justice and Multilingual Education. It is freely available online, and the first issue is available with lots of great resources and ideas that really map onto what we've been talking about and to provide resources that can help all of us in our practice trying to humanize ourselves and one another. And then, of course, our book is available, and we're also happy to be in touch. So please reach out if you would like to. But now I think I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Nancy and Cara, for such a beautiful presentation of your book. I just can't wait. I feel like I need to kind of pull together a book club, and we all kind of dig down every chapter and really explore how we, and I love this, open our hearts and open our pedagogies to be much more humanized in our teaching. I do have 4 questions that I sort of talked with both of you before, but I'm feeling like you're answering some of these questions already in your presentation, and we do have questions from audience. So I'm going to try to do both because we're running out of time a little bit. So one of the things that you have shared really in the first few slides is you have described for us what I would see if I walk into a classroom and recognize the classroom as having humanizing pedagogies in its life. Do you want to add anything to that, or do you feel like your presentation had sort of answered that question?
I think one of the things as I was thinking about this question is how important it is to recognize that we are going to humanize different people differently and each group of students we work with, right? So when I walk into a classroom and I don't know the teacher and the students, I can make some assumptions about what's going on, but the real humanizing is then that very real connection. I definitely think when I walk into a classroom where there's like expansive engagement, I think that's a place to start, right? Like, I too often have walked into classrooms where there is a multilingual student sitting alone with an iPad, talking to no one, not even really doing anything meaningful on the iPad, and everyone else is doing something valuable and interesting. That would not be humanizing, right? I think we have to have at the base that everyone in the room is mattering and is being included in some sort of way. And to be truly humanizing, we do have to be responsive to who those actual individuals are, right? So that also includes attending to interests, cultural background, linguistic practices, all of those things.
I want to add to that because there's a question in the Q&A that also responds to this. This doesn't happen on the first day because you want it to happen. It's a process of building trust. The specific question is kids are unresponsive. Well, part of that unresponsiveness is a defense against being dehumanized. And so it takes a while for them to maybe believe that this teacher's different. And this teacher truly is interested in what I have to say. And we do lay out some step-by-step processes to build the point where you can't also say, well, we're all going to work at centers. It takes weeks, often sometimes months. So that classroom that was observed and described, that wasn't the first week or even month of school.
That was
And
April. Yeah.
yeah. So this is that I want to keep hope in people that it's not too overwhelming to do this. And when I walk into a classroom, there's just something you just know. And one of them, it's that engagement is, do I know what's going on in this classroom? Are there multiple ways that students can access what's expected of them? And do I see the kids? Can I identify without even knowing the teacher or knowing what's going on, the kids the teacher has given up on? And really, for me, part of the essence of that humanizing pedagogy is the relationship and sending the message that you are a pain in the butt, you are disrespectful at times, you can be hurtful, but I am not giving up on you. And
That
that
is so
may
important. Yeah.
it just may not show up until 4 years later when they say,
Yeah.
I still remember when you did X.
Yeah.
And it was
No,
really
thank you
helpful.
for sharing that. Yeah. And so I guess the follow-up question, I'm going to just do one more question that I prepared, and then we'll go to audience question because I see there's a lot of people having question. So if I were to, and I'm committed to humanizing pedagogies, what habits should I build in my teaching repertoire for myself as I grow in a trusting relationship with my students and my colleagues?
I think the most important place to start, honestly, is to humanize yourself. Teachers are really dehumanized in our current system. We're not allowed to make mistakes. We're supposed to not even like have painful, hard things happen to us and have that even be exposed in any way. There's ways that I feel like as teachers, we're just supposed to be these productivity robots. And I do think it's important to see ourselves as humans and act like humans, be vulnerable, have flaws. I mean, I can't help it. I'm an overly flawed human being. So like when I was teaching middle school, I can't spell. I need spell check. I'm sorry. But my students were happy to tell me how much I had spelled something wrong on the board. And then it was like, okay, how do I spell it right and fix it? And it was just one of those things where like we're allowed to have flaws. And I think as teachers, if we can accept and embrace our own humanness, that opens up an opportunity for us to have more real human connections with others. And it doesn't have to be in terms of like um, unprofessional boundaries, right? That's not what I'm suggesting. It's just really actually being fully human yourself. For me, that is often like I have cried in front of multiple classes when I've lost, loved ones, when I'm struggling with my health. Like I will be very honest and tell my students what's happening in my life so that they know how to treat me with kindness. And then I don't ever ask them to tell me anything that they don't want to tell me. But when I share what's happening in my life, they're much more open, and I feel like we have a much more honest relationship, and we're able to then co-construct solutions. So that's for me the very first place to start.
I want
Awesome.
to add a little bit to that because for me, Zip, when you ask that question, it comes out of the work that you and I have done together on the clear paradigm. And there are two aspects to the habits that we need to develop, which I think is really important, is the dispositions or our orientations, what our understandings are, and then our practices in the classroom, which really um, grow out of that. And I think that that asset orientation and this constant introspection of understanding who I am as a human being, both my strengths and my flaws, what's my positionality. I mean, I'm an old white woman now. Putting me in front of a classroom is, what do I offer as an old white woman? I offer a hell of a lot. I can't offer what a young Latina does. I can't offer what somebody who speaks languages that I don't do, but I can offer this. And I think looking at that introspection of how does who I am interface with who my students are? And is it the same this year as it was last year? No, it's constantly evolving. But it's this habit of getting into thinking about what's happening, other dispositions in there. Also, I'm looking that you try and develop your own intercultural and culturally diverse exposure. So you're reading literature from different authors, you're attending events, you're making contact and being in places where you might be outside of your comfort zone so you understand what it's like to be outside of your comfort zone. And keep coming back to, I'm always learning. There's a phrase I use from a teacher in Aurora Public Schools that I have is we never get there. This is a constantly evolving journey. And as soon as you sort of reach a highlight in what's happening, now there's another place to go. We do this work because our lives are so joyful in doing this work. And I think if we can keep that there, I have seen a lot of things about standardized tests in the floating by my eyes. They're a reality that we have to deal with. When we humanize our students, we figure out other ways to show how they've learned and how they've grown that may not count to anybody but us and them and their families, but are a true measure of who they are and how they've grown over this time. And that, in the long run, I think makes a lot of difference for them.
Yeah. And I would imagine that humanizing pedagogies include attempt or at least our intentional efforts to humanize assessment as well, right? And that's like topic for another day, maybe.
Yes,
There
but
is
it
a
is a chapter.
chapter. There is a chapter.
That's right. There is a chapter
And
on
I want
that.
to add another thing. It's looking at, we talk a lot about restorative justice, and Kara gave an example also of in the thumb up example. Instead of saying this is one way or this is another way, is co-constructing. What we want to do is reduce harm. We don't want to be in the position of monitoring behavior to see who's breaking the rules. We want to be in the position of how do our behaviors affect the learning of the community, and how together can we work out resolutions when behaviors may not fit a rule, but there's a really good reason that they're happening that we may also need to address. That means that openness and flexibility and willingness to try. And it doesn't mean there's no absolutes ever, but it does mean we need to get underneath and involve all the people involved. And the last thing, if I get to say nothing else, I want to say is I have two words, the I word and the T word. The I word is intentionality, and the T word is transparency. Part of humanizing our students is to be very clear about why have we organized our instruction in this classroom space the way we have, and to be very intentional that we're in this together to learn together. And all of us can help each of the rest of the people in this space learn and grow and interact with each other. That's a challenge to a competitive individualist society. But it is a possibility that my unalterable belief is everybody in here has dignity and is worth making the effort to learn with and from.
Well,
Yes.
in building off of that, anytime a student is having a challenge, there is always something we can do. It may not be that we can give their money, their family money to pay the rent, or do you know what I mean? Like there's large challenges that we can't provide the direct solution for, but we always can be the person who says, I'm sorry this is happening to you, and I'm going to support you in whatever way I can. And I've often found that just taking that approach is huge. There's university policies I can't change for my students. There's things happening that I have no power or control over, but I have a lot of power and control over how much I listen to them, how much I use what I hear from my students to do something that can be helpful for them, how I try to change the systems that I have power in so that it reduces harm, those kind of things. So sometimes I think there is so much happening that's so difficult and hard, but there is always a way to connect and to show our care. And that is at the core of what we need to be doing.
Mm. There's a question here that I feel like maybe it's the last question we can have. But there's a question here that says, how do you see your work as connected to standards or standard-based instruction?
I think it's deeply connected because we want students to have really, really strong grade level content understandings. But a lot of the ways that we see things happening in schools, I'm not convinced that students are doing that. So the kind of instruction that we're talking about is the instruction that research has shown students perform at much higher levels on content understanding, English language development, because they're interacting, they're doing, they're thinking. It's all aligned with everything we know about how brains work, how good learning happens. So it's deeply, deeply connected to that. And one thing I will say is an important shift, I think, is moving from like we have learning outcomes and those are the standards to shifting to helping students see themselves as part of an exploration, right? So there's a school that I've seen really, really do incredible work. They took their entire curriculum and shifted from learning outcomes to inquiry questions. Every lesson, every unit, everything is framed around a question. And the students have so much more ownership over their learning, as well as a really clear understanding of why they're doing the things that they're doing. And they've demonstrated incredibly high levels of success and learning. So it's 100% should be standards based. It's not one or the other. In fact, this will improve learning outcomes because we learn best when we are well and connected and safe and belong and all of those things.
And I think
That's-
another aspect of that, there are some issues with some standards as they are developed, but our students have a right to access those standards. And I think that's a really important thing. We are not talking about reorganizing the classroom so they can play around with whatever they think they want to play around with. We are guided by a framework, and they have a right to be aware of that standard, to question that standard, to interrogate that standard, but that should drive the instruction. An eighth grader shouldn't be doing fourth grade curriculum. An eighth grader should be working on eighth grade curriculum using the linguistic resources and tools that they have, and getting instruction that accounts for the fact that they're not yet maybe fluent in English. And how can instruction? So that's where all those other book about strategies that are out there. And I saw a couple questions about PSYOP that are in there. There are actual instructional strategies that blend nicely with what we're talking about. But
Yeah.
both of us, I can say, so strongly feel that without addressing the external context, recognizing the impact of the dominant cultural narratives on the students who are multilingual learners, and without really shifting our mindset, really orienting ourselves to openness and shared responsibility, we are not going to be able to implement successfully any teaching strategies. They don't work in a void.
Mm. Wow, thank you. We are at 4:29.
Oh,
Uh, and I can sit all day and listen to the two of you, let me tell you, and have this conversation. So I wanted to thank you for putting your heart into this work and sharing it with us. Yeah, and I want to thank our audiences, our participants for being here. Thank you so much for joining us. And please keep having the conversation. Buy the book, have book clubs. Ask me to join. I would love to join you for a book
Ask us
club
to join too.
yeah, ask us to
just to
come to a
hear
book
what you
club.
see, what you think about these ideas. But in the meantime, please be well. Take care of yourself. And thank you for joining us. And thank you, Nancy and Kara and Tanya, for being with us today.
It's been such a pleasure. We so appreciate you for making it possible.
With that, thank you everyone for joining us today. I couldn't have said it better. Thank you, Dr. Zip. Everyone, enjoy the rest of your day. Please watch your emails for a recording of this webinar. See you at the next one.
So